Thank you so much for inviting me, Ian. This is quite a delight. I've never been to Scotland before, so I'm really quite pleased that I had the opportunity to come. Well, some of you do know a little bit about the National Center for Science Education. It's an American NGO, or nonprofit as we call them, and we work to try to keep evolution being taught in the public schools. In the United States, alas, this is necessary because there's a high level of rejection of evolution among many Americans, as shown by just about every poll or survey that's been conducted. The most recent poll suggests that things might slowly be improving. The Fox News organizations, of all people, asked the question, which do you think is more likely to actually be the explanation for the origins of human life on Earth? And they asked this twice, once in 1999 and just recently in 2011. The theory of evolution, as outlined by Darwin and other scientists, has increased from 15% to 21%. That's progress. The margin of error for a poll of this nature is about 3%, so the improvement in the acceptance of evolution is probably statistically significant. The biblical account of creation as told in the Bible, it's roughly the same, 50% and 45%, are both true, roughly the same, 26%, 27%, and the don't knows, don't care, whatever, has remained about the same. But the frequency of acceptance of evolution, at least in this poll, seems to be improving. We like to think so. Compared to British data, though, we've got a long way to go. The Theos Faraday Institute for Science and Religion study, Rescuing Darwin, conducted in 2009, showed that about 2/3 of the British accept evolution, about 65%. But you're not completely out of the woods. A bit over 25%, a bit over a quarter, 28%, are creationists of either the young Earth or intelligent design variety. But the acceptance of evolution is almost matched in its dismal percentage by the acceptance of global warming in the United States, although a few years ago there was a much higher percentage of Americans accepting that global warming was taking place. There are several parallels between the denial of evolution and the denial of global warming, which are of interest to the National Center for Science Education. We're concerned, as I said, with the teaching of science, and the clear consensus in the scientific community is both that evolution occurs and has occurred, and that global warming is real and significantly influenced by human activities. Teachers should be teaching the consensus view of science and not have to buckle to political pressure. Teachers in the United States are facing pressure to avoid the teaching of both evolution and global warming, or to teach false science, that global warming isn't happening and that evolution didn't happen either. So we have become interested in this topic of global warming and in the comparison of it with evolution, particularly since teachers are being leaned upon in the teaching of both. So global warming denialism takes several forms. I'm going to be talking primarily about the first two, but let me get to them gradually. One, the strongest form of denial, if you will, about global warming is that it's not getting warmer. It just simply is not happening. The second approach is that it is getting warmer, but humans aren't responsible. It is not anthropogenic. Or it's getting warmer and we're responsible, but there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So these are the three forms that global warming denial take in the United States. I'm going to be talking about 1 and 2. The subject of mitigation is fascinating in and of itself, but it's more of a policy issue than it is an issue of science. So we're a science organization. We're going to stick to the science. In our perusal of the creationism and evolution controversy, lo these many years, at NCSC we have developed what we call descriptively the pillars of creationism. If you look at any letter to the editor, if you look at any book or any movie or any production by creationists, the arguments all seem to fall into one or more of these three categories, and those are our pillars. One is that evolution is invalid science. Evolution is being given up upon by scientists, which will come as a real surprise to scientists, and that it's just not as strongly supported as it used to be. A second is that evolution and religion are incompatible, that you have to choose between especially Christian faith and science, between faith and evolution. A third argument, the third pillar, is perhaps the most powerful, and that is the fairness pillar. That if you teach evolution, well, it's only fair that you teach something to balance it out. And traditionally in the history of this controversy, that something to balance it out has been some kind of religious view. This has changed recently in the evolution of creationism, if you will. It used to be that we'll teach evolution but balance it out with the teaching of the Bible. For a variety of reasons we don't have time to go into, the United States Constitution doesn't allow that. We don't allow the teaching, the advocacy of religion in our public schools. When that failed, the argument became teach evolution but balance it with the teaching of something called creation science, which was an effort to make biblical literalism scientific. Well, that didn't work either with our legal system. Then the argument became teach evolution but balance it with the teaching of intelligent design. Courts decided that that also was a religious position. It wasn't really science, it was just a religious view trying to masquerade as science, much as creation science had been before it. Now, what we're dealing with, and I'll get to this in more detail later on in my talk, the argument that you teach evolution, but you balance it with the teaching of the evidence against evolution, which again comes as a real surprise to the scientists. There also are pillars of global warming, and they're really quite similar to our pillars of evolution. My colleague Josh Rosenau has, I'm indebted to him for this observation. One, that anthropogenic global warming is weak science. The science just isn't there. Either the Earth is not getting warm or it's getting warm, but we're not responsible. It's not anthropogenic. The second pillar is parallel to the second pillar in creationism, the second pillar being the religion pillar. But in the case of global warming, it isn't so much a religious ideology that is motivating anti-global warmingists as it is a political or economic ideology. The idea that anthropogenic global warming is anti-capitalist or pro-big government, and therefore it should be opposed. The third pillar is very, very similar to the third pillar of creationism, and this is the fairness pillar. In this case, it's taken the form, as in fact it has taken the form in the creationism issue as well, that teachers should be teaching both that global warming and anti-global warming to balance each other out, but also as a way of helping students become critical thinkers. And this, of course, is precisely the argument that creationists have been making to try to persuade teachers to teach both as a critical thinking exercise when it comes to evolution as well. Now, there's much more to be said on these issues, but again, the time is short. So let me move on to another point to clear up a little bit of confusion between political and religious conservatism. Now, religious conservatives, evangelicals, fundamentalists, charismatics, many others, this is the wing of Christianity that stresses the inerrancy of the Bible. To some degree that gets into biblical literalism, but the most important factor of conservative Christianity is having a personal relationship with Jesus as a means to salvation. Political conservatives in the United States, on the other hand, are characterized by a confidence in capitalism as an economic system, opposition to taxation, a belief in minimal government, if at all, and individuality and personal liberty are elevated to a very, very high state, and a great deal of confidence in the American myth that through your own hard work you can succeed. Notice I referred to this as an American myth. Please note, not all religious conservatives are political conservatives, certainly. In fact, in the United States, some of the best work done among the poor and disadvantaged in terms of assistance to the homeless or needy families is done by evangelical Christians. And similarly, not all political conservatives are religious conservatives, but where they overlap, you find religious right, as we call it in the United States, the overlapping of political and religious conservatism. Now, where does creationism and the anti-global warming movement fit in with these categories? Well, the anti-evolutionists, if we were to lay this over this religious and political Venn diagram here, anti-evolutionists reliably include the religious right, but not all religious conservatives are anti-evolutionists. In fact, at NCSC, we have some very powerful and important allies among evangelicals in promoting the acceptance of evolution. Not all, sorry about that, I have a zippy little mouse here. Not all political conservatives are anti-evolutionists. Many political conservatives are not religious conservatives. In addition, there are other variables that crosscut these that I haven't integrated into the diagram, such as education. Anti-evolutionism does reflect religious conservatism, but it also reflects education. So the more education you have, the more likely you are to accept evolution. So there's many factors that go into this anti-evolution box here. It's not merely a matter of just the religious conservatives, although obviously that is a very large part of it. What about global warming, the anti-global warming movement? Well, if we were to lay that over these Venn diagrams, again, the religious right is reliably anti-global warming, and most political conservatives in the US are also anti-global warming as well. But there's not necessarily a close association between religious conservatism and anti-global warming. In fact, there's a substantial group of green Christians who are environmentalists to the core. They favor creation care or stewardship theology rather than dominion theology. And so they believe that husbanding the earth is very important to carry out God's will. So now that we have motivation out of the way, and I've complicated the situation considerably, let's talk a little bit about similarities in how anti-evolutionists and anti-global warmingists approach promoting their views. A major technique discussed by or illustrated by Oreskes and Conway in their very good book, Merchants of Doubt, was used by the tobacco companies during the decades that public health organizations attempted to demonstrate that smoking caused cancer, addiction, heart disease, and other negative effects. And this, of course, is related to the first pillar, the claim that science is not yet settled on the issue. This is made explicit by a PR firm advising Republican congressional candidates. Should the public come to believe that the scientific issues are settled, their views about global warming will change accordingly. Therefore, you need to continue to make the lack of scientific certainty a primary issue in the debate. This is my emphasis. The contention is that since the science is not yet settled, there's no need to take action, much as the tobacco companies argued that we don't need warning labels on cigarettes because our scientists say that smoking is harmless. Now, the idea of questioning the science is often done through presenting a slate of scientists that support your point of view. And certainly the creationists have done this for decades. Most recently, the Discovery Institute, which is a promoter of intelligent design creationism, came up with a petition of 100 scientists doubting Darwin. And of course, this has increased over the years. It's now about 800. If you're interested in our response to this, just Google Project Steve, and there's enough chuckles around the audience that some of you already know Project Steve, but anyway, this is silly. Similarly, the anti-global warming side also has its list of scientists doubting global warming. Arthur Robinson and his sons run the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine, OISM. And this petition that they've been circulating for several years has an impressive sounding 30,000 scientists on their list. Now, signatories need to have a bachelor's degree or higher. However, it's drawn from not just climate scientists, but a fairly random list of sciences, including medicine, engineering, veterinary medicine, agriculture, computer science, and, oh yes, the occasional climate scientist as well. About a third, and the single largest category, about 10,000 people, have checked the general science category. So the notion that this 30,000 number, which is a large number, and it sounds very, very impressive, when the statistics are examined a little, it becomes a little less persuasive, particularly since there have been many complaints by scientists who have found their names on this list, but they themselves did not sign up for the list. But at any event, even 30,000 scientists is a small fraction of the total number of people receiving degrees in science since approximately the 1970s, which would be the cohort that would be being sampled, shall we say. One calculation had it as 0.3%. So the idea that there is this huge groundswell of scientists opposing global warming is, to say the least, overstated. Another technique for questioning the science that you find in both the creationism issue and the global warming issue is cherry picking the data. Oops. It's a classic creationist technique. Find an apparent anomaly and thereby challenge evolution. Most of the young Earth creationist arguments against the age of the Earth, for example, are of this nature. This Jack Chick cartoon from the cartoon book Primal Man talks about a lava flow in Hawaii that was dated through potassium argon method as 3 billion years, and yet it was recorded that this lava flowed in 1801. So clearly radioisotopic dating is worthless. Clearly, if the Earth is not old, then evolution couldn't occur. So if evolution didn't occur, creationism occurs and we win. So hence goes the argument. Find an anomalous bit of information in the scientific literature and hold it up as disproving your opponent. Well, of course, if you actually look at this article that's cited in this comic book, you find that the authors are geologists who are shall we say, warning their fellow geologists who work in this area to be aware of contaminants that can show up in lava. These particular example here is olivine xenoliths that appear in lava, but they come from far, far below the mantle, and so they throw the dates off. These are recognizable. They're sort of lumpy-looking structures that you find in the lava. And what this article really is talking about is how to refine the techniques of radioisotopic dating. It's not calling into question the whole idea of radiometric dating, potassium argon or otherwise. And the creationist data, creationist literature is chock full of this kind of thing. A popular anti-global warmingist contention is that the medieval warm period, which was from about 950 to about 1250, was warmer than it is today, and it was thereafter followed by a little ice age. This is a drawing from the IPCC 1990. The dotted line represents the temperature near the beginning of the 20th century. So you see that the medieval warm period was considerably warmer on average, and then the little ice age came in. Now, this is of interest because the medieval warm period is the time that the Vikings were able to settle and actually raise crops in Greenland. And as the period ended, so also did the Norse occupation of Greenland. Anti-global warmingists contend that because the medieval warm period is before the Industrial Revolution, present-day warming, if it's occurring at all, isn't out of the ordinary and isn't due to human activity. Yet this is, again, cherry-picking the data. During the time of the medieval warm period, Northern Europe and some other parts of the Northern Hemisphere indeed were warmer than today. As you can see by the red and yellow and orange is warm. You can see the scale at the bottom. The blue colors are cooler. The red colors are warmer. In fact, the planet as a whole, though, was not warmer. In fact, large parts of the planet were cooler than those same geographic regions are today. If you just cherry-pick Northern Europe, it looks very much like the global warming proponents are being alarmist, because obviously this was well before the Industrial Revolution, the release of CO2 into the air, and the alleged warming result. And when you look at measurements of climate around the globe during the last decade, the situation looks quite different. The average temperature of the planet, not just Northern Europe, but the average temperature of the planet is substantially warmer now than it was during the medieval warm period. I'm indebted to Peter Gleick for the next example of cherry picking, which has to do with a claim that was made that the warmest period in the last decade was the warmest year was 1998, and the temperature has simply gotten cool ever since. Well, indeed, if you look at there's 97, 98, 99 up to 2008, and the temperature is on the y-axis there. And indeed, when you look at 1998 to 2008, yes, indeed, there is a decline. But why choose those particular dates? 1997 to 2008 shows a slight rise in temperature, as does 1999 to 2008. But there's even cherry picking involved in the choice of 2008 as well. If you add in the last 2 years of the decade, it's clear that temperature is actually rising, even as measured from 1998. This is cherry picking of data. An even more egregious bit of cherry picking was also provided by Peter Gleick, and I thank him for that. He notes that the Heartland Institute, which is a anti-global warming, has an anti-global warming position, it's a nonprofit in the US, claimed National Snow and Ice Data Center records show conclusively that in April 2009, Arctic sea ice extent had indeed returned to and surpassed 1989 levels. Well, Arctic sea ice is of considerable interest to climatologists because as the ocean gets warmer, there are significant changes in oceanic ecosystems, and this has very significant ramifications for things like corals and even for fisheries, upon which large percentages of the human population depend. Now, if we take a look at the data, not just for February 2000, not just for the month of February, the blue line is 89, the red line is 09, and if we look on the x-axis there for the whole years, January, February, March, April, yes, if we look, we can see that in fact, the month of February was actually warmer, where are we here, in 09 than in 89. But if you look at the entire year, it is clear that 2009, I said warmer, I meant, excuse me, this is sea ice, pardon me. Lots of background noise here. The extent of sea ice was actually slightly greater in the month of February when these 2 years are compared. But if you look at the entire year, it's clear that the amount of sea ice has decreased quite substantially by 2009. And in fact, this trend has continued up until the present. If you look from 1980 to 2010, the total amount of sea ice is decreasing. If you just cherry pick 1 month of 2 years comparison, then the situation looks very different. If you look at the full data, it's clear that this is not a good way to do science. a very interesting similarity between the global warming deniers and the people who reject global warming is attacks upon the implications of the science. If evolution is true, there are bad implications. If global warming is true, there are bad implications. This is particularly clear in the creationist literature. To them, if evolution is true, we're all going to be in very bad shape because then we will have no Christian religious tradition to tell us how to behave. This classic illustration from a creationist conference was collected in the 1990s by the late Bob Shadowald, who also was a important member of the Minnesota Skeptics, since this is a skeptics conference here. The original is in NCSE's archives. It's really quite Baroque when you look at it. You see the branches of all the evils, like abortion and humanism and racism and my favorite, radical feminist movement, yes. And the source of all of these bad things in the culture is evolution, and creation science will take care of that for us. More recently, the intelligent design proponents have expressed much of the same opinion. Philip Johnson's comment being typical. I wanted to know whether the fundamentals of the Christian worldview were fact or fantasy. Darwinism is a logical place to begin because if Darwinism is true, Christian metaphysics is fantasy. So the belief is that if evolution is true, we have to give up our faith. And this is something that conservative Christians simply are not going to countenance, so therefore evolution has to be wrong. The movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, which I don't know if it actually crossed the Atlantic, more pity if it did, because it's a really crummy movie. It was produced by the American actor, or the American actor Ben Stein was starred in it, and it was very important in helping to raise money for it. This movie, again, presents evolution as questionable science, the first pillar, but also links evolution to the eugenics movement and inspiration for the Holocaust. If you go to the website of the movie, this paragraph shows up. Evolution leads to atheism, leads to eugenics, leads to Holocaust and Nazi Germany. Therefore, evolution is this. The implications of evolution are just too awful to imagine. With global warming, the implications are less moral than practical. Anti-global warmingists claim that if we follow the lead of the pro-global warming faction, the Western standard of living is going to fall for no good reason, since, of course, they don't believe global warming is actually happening or that human actions are irrelevant to it. Usually this is phrased in terms of individual freedom. We won't have the freedom to buy the kind of car we want because we'll all have to buy little cars. You guys get along just fine with that. That's not a big problem. Or we won't be free to use as much electricity as we want. We won't be free to use as much water as we want. They picture a future of privation rather than the abundance that we have today. Occasionally, the concern with the implications of global warming, anthropogenic global warming, is expressed in terms of the need to expand Western standards of living, clean air, clean water, food supply, health, etc., to less fortunate people in other nations, which we won't be able to do, they say, without cheap fuels. So therefore, we should reject efforts to try to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are being used. But in the United States, at least, any real or perceived attack on individual freedom is going to find vigorous opposition from at least a very noisy minority. The Ben Stein movie is an example of another attack, another denialist strategy, which is to attack the integrity of scientists themselves. Expelled not only warns against the evil implications of evolution, but also accuses the scientific establishment of conspiring to keep the stalwart, intelligent design scientists from holding jobs and sharing their groundbreaking ideas. Quite possibly the reason why intelligent design has not been accepted in the scientific community is because it's just really bad science, but that's not the position that's being taken in the Expelled movie. In a recent book promoted by the Intelligent Design Group by Benjamin Weicker, The Darwin Myth, and I want to call attention to the subtitle, The Life and Lies of Charles Darwin. Reviewers have noted that Weicker's book has comparable accuracy to that of Rita Skeeter. But attacking the integrity of scientists is something that's quite pervasive among the anti-global warmingists as well. And perhaps the best example of this is the fuss over leaked University of East Anglia emails, colloquially referred to as ClimateGate. Scientists were talking to one another over a period of several years using the typical shorthand that people use in email, not realizing that their mail would be read line by opponents and many out-of-context remarks excerpted. Please note that a half a dozen or more investigative agencies have examined these emails and concluded there were no fraudulent acts nor violation of ethics. It's an interesting story. Check out Wikipedia. I'd be happy to talk about it in more detail in the questions, but let me move on to the educational implications of these two movements. Remember, I spoke of the pillars of creationism, and the third pillar being the fairness pillar, which often takes the form of encouraging students to be critical thinkers. So teach both and let the students exercise their critical thinking abilities. Similarly, global warming takes the same perspective. The anti-global warming faction takes the same perspective. This way we will avoid dogma and, of course, encourage critical thinking. We've seen a lot of this from the creationists. The intelligent design proponent Stephen Meyer has written that we believe you should pedagogically insist on the permissive freedom for teachers to talk about other theories in addition to evolution. Well, if this were a lecture being given in a science department or at a university where the majority of people were scientists, and I were to ask my fellow scientists, can you give me some raise your hand if you can give me an example of an alternate scientific theory to evolution, no hands go up. When it comes to science, evolution is the only game in town. Alternative theories to evolution is code in the creationist literature for teach creationism. They just relabel it, and it works pretty well. In the anti-global warming struggle, the same phenomenon occurs. The bolded sentence here, the goal should be to get politics out of the classroom, not protect it by banning debate and censoring objective sources of research. Note that the anti-global warming faction is presented as being objective. They're presented in a very positive light. That's what one does when one takes a position. I do the same thing. Creationists talk about evolution-only instruction as if that was something bad. Dogmatic Darwinists. A similar meme has not yet evolved with the anti-global warmingists, but I have a feeling that it's perhaps not too far away. And in fact, with both the creationists and the global warming proponents favoring the same approach, it was only a matter of time before the two causes were linked in legislation or proposals promoting critical thinking or a teacher's right to teach. These have taken the form of, okay, now stop reading that article. I know that's what you're doing, all right? This is a prop. Just read the headline. This is an audience of smart people, and you're all going, Oklahoma introduced a bill with similar goals, and you're supposed to be listening to me instead. So, tear yourself away from the text. I trust you to do this. All right. The kind of bill that they're talking about in this article, which I will describe for you so you don't have to go blind trying to read the 10-point type here, is a class of legislation called Academic Freedom Acts. And these are very, very clever. let's see, I'm not going to let you read that. Okay, you can read this, but you'll get through with this much faster than you will that article from the New York Times, so I'm safer here. Academic Freedom Acts are a very clever kind of legislation that plays off this third pillar, if you will. The idea is that rather than requiring the teaching of creationism along with evolution, which the courts have struck down, instead, what teachers are supposed to do is, instead, what these laws do is allow a teacher to do this, or they encourage a teacher to bring in alternative views, or they, in the case of Louisiana, they provide state support for providing materials, instructional materials, books or film strips or something to supplement the normal curriculum, the regular textbooks, which don't include creationism, right? So this is a way of trying to sneak creationism in the back door without running into problems with the American legal system, which does not allow creationism to be advocated in the public schools. And we've had quite a few of these laws proposed over the last half a dozen years or so. Now, several of these laws have now started including global warming along with evolution as topics that teachers should be given permission to bring in alternative information on, or that students should be protected from any sort of, you can't fail a student if a student hands in a creationist paper, basically, is what it boils down to. But the ones that are in italics and that have asterisks are bills where evolution has been bundled, if you will, with global warming. Now, because we're all a bunch of evolutionists at NCSE, my colleague Anton Mates of the NCSE staff drew up a phylogeny of academic freedom acts, which I think helps make clear the similarities and differences of these many bills. The original Academic Freedom Act was a bill that showed up originally in Alabama in 2004. And it talked about the rights of students and teachers to go outside of the curriculum, if you will. It protected teachers and students if they did this. In other words, a school district couldn't say, no, Mrs. Brown, stop teaching creationism. This is unconstitutional. Mrs. Brown could say, well, the state law protects me. You can't stop me from doing this. So this would have been a very bad law. The Alabama bill was critiqued by the Discovery Institute, and later bills dropped reference to alternative theories and replaced that language, because alternative theories everybody kind of knows as code words for creationism. They substituted that wording to teachers should be presenting the full range of scientific views. This sounds much less religious, which is very important when you consider the American legal system. Now, here we go. This tree represents another strain of academic freedom acts, which originated from a 2006 policy passed in Ouachita Parish in Louisiana, which was promoted by the Louisiana Family Forum, which is a conservative Christian organization. This, again, was couched in terms of the critical analysis of alternate views, strengths and weaknesses of evolution, but it also added global warming, origin of life, and cloning to evolution as topics that teachers were supposed to encourage this kind of critical thinking about. And pretty much all of the bills upstream, shall we say, from that red arrow include these other features. Now, the two strains of academic freedom acts, as in horizontal gene transfer, have influenced one another, and this is clearly more detailed than anybody outside of the United States ever actually wants to know about these laws. But it's just such a great diagram, I couldn't help but not show it. So we have the takeaway here is there's a lot of these bills, a big chunk of them include global warming bundled with evolution in this third pillar kind of framing, shall we say. A good example of a recent Academic Freedom Act is a Tennessee law that narrowly was defeated this year, calling for students to question a group of topics: evolution, biological evolution, chemical origins of life, global warming, and human cloning. I guarantee you there is not a single school district in the United States in which human cloning is required to be taught. And here's the lab, boys and girls. No, this is silly. It's completely ridiculous. But these 4 topics are topics that are of particular interest to the religious right, to that intersection of religious conservatives and political conservatives. And because the religious right has its knickers in a twitch about these topics, these are all shoved into these laws, whether or not they're ever actually taught. The most worrisome of these laws is a law passed in Louisiana in 2008. All the other laws that I showed you on those phylogenies, on those green trees, none of them passed. Not by accident, by the way. They didn't pass because enough citizens went to those hearings, wrote the letters to the editor, talked to their congresspeople and their state legislators and said, we don't think this is good education for our kids. I encourage you to vote against it. And in all of the cases, the people we work with managed to get these laws scotched, except in Louisiana, unfortunately. And this Louisiana bill has, alas, become a model for several similar bills. Now, you find some very interesting language associated with these academic freedom bills, which, again, reflects this third pillar of fairness, critical thinking, and so forth. Students are exhorted to learn, and teachers are exhorted to teach the full range of views regarding global warming or evolution. Critically evaluate evolution or global warming. To present the arguments for or against global warming and evolution, or teach all relevant scientific information about evolution and global warming. To understand, critique, and review. These are all very positive sounding verbs, and the sort of thing that we all expect our children to be learning in school. The trouble is, the students are being encouraged to study things that are not so. Students are being encouraged to consider the evidence for evolution and the evidence against evolution, except there isn't scientific evidence against evolution. That all comes from the creationist literature, and it's of the quality of those xenoliths that I mentioned in the lava flows. Should we be wasting students' time with that kind of nonsense? Most scientists don't think that's the case, and science teachers don't think that's the case either. The argument is often made, well, why not present both views and let the students decide? And what you should do when you're, contemplating that question is think about what is a 10th grader supposed to be doing? The job of a 10th grader is a little different from that of a research scientist. Research scientists are supposed to be, considering the arguments for and against a particular theory, critically evaluating one another's theories. That's not something we ask 15-year-olds to do, because they don't really have the background to do it. And there are so many different sciences involved. The example that I just gave, radioisotopic dating in geology, that's relevant to understanding biological evolution as well. So, this notion that we should take high school kids and present them, number one, with erroneous information and have them decide between erroneous information and good information, that's not a very good critical thinking exercise. There are many critical thinking exercises that can be done in high school and should be done, because we do want our kids to be critical thinkers. But having them seriously debate issues that are not considered in contention by the scientific community is not a very good pedagogical strategy. In the interest of giving balance to all points of view, lesson plans have kindly been prepared by nonprofits associated with the fossil fuels industries, such as the American Coal Foundation, even student activity books, which of course are the lazy teacher's dream. This lesson on coal and the greenhouse effect provides balance that calls into question standard science regarding CO2 and certainly does not reflect the scientific consensus. Some scientists believe that adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere will help trap too much heat and make the Earth's climate become warmer over time. Well, yes, some scientists, 97% of climate scientists. At any rate, Still, other research indicates that Earth could benefit rather than be harmed from increased carbon dioxide, which makes plants grow larger. That is also dealt with in the literature. On this website, our old friend, the medieval warm period, is called forth and used to cast doubt on anthropogenic global warming. Note how the testimonials reflect the third pillar enthusiasm for critical thinking. If a warmer Earth, this is Beth. Beth is obviously a student. If a warmer Earth leads to increased levels of CO2 and not the other way around, then can human use of fossil fuel be the cause of global warming? And Willie Soon is a very well-known climate anti-global warmingist. Most of us still have that nagging question. Well, no, not really, only about 2 or 3% of you. Yes, we have emitted all this carbon dioxide. Are we really, really melting all the ice caps, or is it something even more powerful than that? I mean, could it even be the sun? Most climate scientists think that that is completely wrong-headed and not anywhere near what is actually going on. Note how the testimonials reinforce the third pillar enthusiasm for critical thinking, as well as the meme that scientists are suppressing views. These are testimonials from teachers who have used these materials, an excellent classroom-friendly resource in which scientists were allowed to raise critical questions. Allowed? Come on, scientists are allowed to raise these questions all the time. Come on. If other scientists think they're wrong, it's not that they're not allowed to raise them. They just have to demonstrate that their positions are supported by evidence, and they have not convinced the scientific community that that's the case. I was eager to share this with my students to help them see other viewpoints and help them see the importance of looking beyond popular theory. Well, that's a good thing to do, except when you're dealing with pretty well-established science. You want a student coming into class saying, well, I got some literature at my church last week that says the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Let's challenge that established science that the world is really billions of years old. How much time does a teacher really want to spend with that? Earlier this year, a teacher in California showed the Al Gore movie An Inconvenient Truth in an advanced placement biology class. A parent complained, and the administration sort of did the knee-jerk fairness thing. Well, we have a complaint from a parent, so we'll make everybody happy. We'll have a debate between a global warming proponent and an anti-global warmingist, a denier of global warming. That's really a bad idea, and we worked with the teacher and the teacher's union representative, which was useful. We worked with the teacher to try to propose another compromise that would keep the parent happy. You do have to keep parents happy, but you can't sacrifice good science education to keep parents happy. And what was concluded is that the debatable issues are really what to do about global warming. They really are the policy issues. Those are the ones in which the jury still is out. The jury is not out on whether CO2 causes warming. That jury's voted and they've gone home. But is carbon tax versus cap and trade, those are all issues for which you can get a serious debate, but that's not in a science class. That's over in a social studies or a modern problems or a sociology class. The science is pretty well settled. We shouldn't be debating arguments against global warming in a science class any more than we should be debating arguments against evolution in the science class, when the consensus among climate scientists as well as the consensus among biologists in evolution is so very lopsidedly strong. We don't do our children we do not make our children critical thinkers by wasting their time debating things that are not in contention. Let them debate topics that really are in contention. That would be a good critical thinking exercise. We have a lot more information on the creationism issue. We are just starting to concern ourselves with global warming, so we'll be coming up with a new webpage for that. But if you want to go to ncsc.com, you can find more information. If you're interested in getting a free electronic newsletter, comes out on Friday, just a little one-pager, you can sign up where that ring is there. At the top on the news button, if you want to click there, you'll be taken to this page where you can learn more about what's going on in the creationism and evolution controversy, both in the United States as well as internationally. And you can search by year. This is a great resource for any student doing a paper on the creation and evolution controversy. We have lots and lots of information. We are a membership organization. We'd be happy to have foreign members as well as North American members. It is the National Center for Science Education, ncsc.com. Glenn Branch is the Deputy Director of NCSC. Robert Lunn is our Communications Director. Peter Hess is our Faith Outreach Director. And our Flare-Ups Wranglers, Josh Rosenow and Steve Newton, are the ones who answer the questions about what do I do when a parent is leaning on me, or what do we do in our community, we elected the wrong school board. And Eric Mickle is our Education Director. Check us out on YouTube. Steve Gould is holding the best biological bumper sticker. It's ours. It says, "Honk if you understand punctuated equilibria." There must be biologists in the and everybody else just went kind of, As a biologist, that's a real knee slapper. Just, you don't get a lot of honks. Just keep your expectations low, okay? On the other hand, when you're easing onto the freeway and somebody's really leaning on their horn behind you, just say, "Oh, he must understand punctuated equilibria." It assuages lots of concerns about those matters. We also are on Facebook, and as I say, we've got tons and tons and tons on YouTube. If I might ask, I get many Facebook requests, and I think that's great. It's very flattering. But if you would mind going to eugenie.scott and clicking like there, that's where I update. I generally have to spend a fair amount of time every day. The people who try to friend me on my old page, which has too many people on it, so Facebook has made me start the fan page, and you will save me a lot of time if you just go there instead. At any rate, I very much appreciate having been invited by Ian and the Glasgow Skeptics. I can't wait to see more of Scotland. I'm going to Edinburgh tomorrow. And if Ian is around, he can tell me whether what we do now. Do you take a break? Do you have questions? Tell me. You tell them.
Well, thanks very much to Eugenie for that talk. Well,